And we are live on Twitch.
Dope.
How you doing today, dog?
Oh, I'm great, man. How you doing?
Doing well, man. Another day. Here to see how everybody feels about themselves, ain't it?
All right. So today we are going to try and extend slash deepen our conversation from last week where we discussed what it means to be yourself. We revolved a lot around being and becoming. And so I think that will be a fruitful idea for today to try to connect that with being and becoming in a social environment and what it means for the individual or the self to operate beneficially and poorly in society, around other people, around your family, at your job, and what all that means, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I think the point I was going to bring off of from the last conversation is the public, private, and secret face point. And understanding how people interact with society on those different levels is one thing I think is very important. Because I think sometimes people aren't as aware of, or they're not as actively conscious of the fact that they create an egoic version of themselves that they teach to other people what that is. And like some people don't realize that they're disingenuous because it's just a habit of how they communicate. And so figuring out how to be one, more comfortable with self in social spaces, and two, more comfortable with who you are and how you're presenting yourself actually compared to what you think you're doing, and being willing to be accountable for that, I think are important things.
Sorry, excuse me, drinking sparkling water. Um, okay, so one distinction I have this feeling that we are going to disagree on a lot of things here, but that's fun. That's a good conversation. Um, Tell me more about, you use the word actual self or who you actually are. You use the word actually there. And so I'm wondering if you are distinguishing between like a real identity that you perhaps only reveal to yourself when you're alone compared to a persona, which is something that's fake.
So more so what I'm speaking on is how you're actually presenting. Like we have an idea of what we would want ourselves to look like, how we try to speak, how we try to present ourselves, how we try to dress. And then there's how you're perceived in the actual moment of the situation. And so sometimes I believe that there's a gap between our intentions and how it's received by others that we don't control. And so sometimes we miss that space there because we're unwilling to see how someone else could perceive our actions, our decisions, or our language.
I think I understood what you said. We have an idea of who we are, and we think that we are presenting ourselves a certain way. And then other people have an idea of who we are that they perceive when they interact with us. And you mentioned that there sometimes could be a gap between those two.
Yeah, because I mean, you think about this, like if I intend to help someone out and I go to help them, and the thing that I do actually isn't what would be helpful for them because I misunderstood their situation. My intention was to help. My intention is to be a good person, but I could have just fucked someone's entire situation up just because I wasn't quite aware of how I needed to actually interact. And so the reason why I say actual there is because your intentions don't always match what's actually going on in the situation. And sometimes our intention and our will to behave or attempt or to achieve certain things um, gets overshadowed with what actually happened. And so we just accept, well, this is what I wanted to do and this is what happened. Or this is what I wanted to do and this is how I felt like it happened. And then it's like, but nah. That
Yeah.
wasn't it. You know? Even just when we think about some people that are intoxicated and they try to, oh, I went over there drunk and I did this and I did a great job. And then the person that they actually helped is like, they came over here, all right. But it was what they're describing isn't the actuality of the situation.
Okay, so you're in part highlighting how complex social interactions could be, right? You're saying that each individual, for example, you and I have my intentions and then I have my actions, but you, generally speaking, can't read my mind, nor can you read my heart or my soul or whatever, wherever my intentions are. And so, primarily, what you see are my actions. And so, one, I can be confused about my own intentions and my actions because I'm not transparent to myself. There's a whole aspect of my psyche that's unconscious, and so there's that point of friction. And then on top of that, there can be a point of friction between, let's say, the other person's expectations of you and then your actual actions. Is that kind of what you're highlighting?
Yeah, and so in essence, what I'm saying is that every individual interaction among a group of beings or entities in a space could be like a room from One Piece. How God does the room. The things that happen within this space are perceived differently from each individual, right? And the person that's in the middle perceives themselves as being able to change and rearrange how this is actually working. But in actuality, the people that know what's going on see like, wait, they may be missing something. And so it's really just more so speaking to the gap of when people try to do this thing for, oh, I want to be myself. Okay, well, you have to first of all consider how yourself integrates with society. And that's a very complicated thing because you could have things that you want to do that are cool to you, but just socially, it just there's no way for that identity to manifest. Or you're going to be upset with the rejection you face because people don't perceive what you're trying to do in the way that you do. And so there's a gap with their different experiences, different cultures that could cause a disconnect here. And being able to either have the confidence to weigh that or having the intelligence and the discernment to know when to use it or how to act a certain way, I believe is a very important aspect of self-love because sometimes we'll beat ourselves up because we're trying to put intention in place that it doesn't belong, if that makes sense.
I think I understood. It seems like now we're getting into like what does it mean to be a well socialized adult? What does it mean to balance who you are and what you want with the wants of others? And as you were speaking, I was thinking about this psychologist. His name is Jean Piaget, and he focused a lot on cognitive development and the genesis of knowledge structures. But one area that he focused on in terms of developmental psychology is play and kids learning how to play. He
Mm.
actually tracked stages, for lack of a better word, but it's not necessarily that it was their stages, but he tracked differences in how children play across time. Let's say starting from the age of 7 all the way through 13 or 14, and play is super interesting as a form of learning and as a form of socialization, right? It's like you have to get those basic patterns of taking turns, of waiting your turn, of being patient, of delaying gratification to play any social game. And so he would watch kids play marbles, or I think in the past video I brought up playing basketball, but anyone can imagine this how being able to play a good game is a useful proxy for whether or not you're a well socialized individual.
Yeah, because you have to be aware of social cues, like you said with basketball and different things. You have to notice when some players just don't have that extra to give. Like there's always the guy that's over competitive at a game, and it's like you make it not fun because you're not aware of like some people just really come to have a good time, and they're not really focused on that. And sometimes the different like you ever realize that the basketball court is a great example because you have that side of the court where there's the guys that are just shooting around, and then you have the guys that are like playing for money on the other side of the court. And there's a two completely different dynamics of players, two completely different sets of rules. And sometimes we don't realize when, especially when we want to do business or be creative, when we stepped into a room of wolves and we're still playing, we're still playing patty cake. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just different levels to it. Whereas like there's rules in games where you can mess up and it's okay and it's like a joke. It's like cool. And then there's certain rooms where it's like messing up can get you extra, can get you not exercise. That's the wrong word. it can get you it can get you kicked out of the society for like exiled is the word I was looking for. You know what I'm saying? From that group or from that participating in that game. And so our ability to be aware of that's why I say every conversation is warfare because you might not notice certain small social cues from different cultures that mean they're disconnecting from the situation or they're not respecting what you're saying or how you're saying it. And it's not necessarily necessary to catch those things, but being aware of certain social cues and being empathetic or just being knowledgeable about a person's culture or how they react and where they come from makes certain situations easier to navigate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I try to do as I'm trying to understand someone who I just met is I imitate them and I try to mirror them. And so Piaget, like I mentioned, thought that play was a great form of learning. He also thought that imitation was another great form of learning because we're so cool as humans that we can imitate people. You could see someone do something and then you can do it, but as you're trying to do it, you're learning about how they see the world. Like you're learning about their intentions, really, with all of the little micro mannerisms and micro actions that they're doing. And so it's so cool. But going back to the social aspect, for example, I'm a behavior counselor. I meet a lot of clients who have different intellectual disabilities and psychiatric disorders. And the first thing that I try to do as I'm engaging with them is I kind of mirror my body to their body. If they get closer to me, then I allow them to get close to me. Then maybe I get a little close to them too. Or if they, are kind of like this, then I like stop and stay away from them. I try my best to kind of compliment them in a way. And my experience has been that when other people see you as something familiar, even if they aren't consciously thinking this, it kind of makes the interaction be a little more smooth.
Definitely. If you can see yourself in a person, it's easier for you to communicate with them. That's why people are like, you always meet those people that go out that are like, oh, you're just like me, or you like this thing that I like. And finding those touch points for communication, like most people in the anime community can say, oh, you watch anime, that just opens the door because there's so many touch points there. Well, what's your favorite anime? What's this? What's that? Or hey, you're Greek. Oh, well, what school did you go to? What's your chapter? Certain things give you these touch points. And I think something that's big as far as like social identity, when we talk about like deep self work, is realizing that sometimes when you get to know yourself at a certain level, it's hard to categorize yourself into any one of these particular groups. And so, one big thing for me for social interaction, I talked about before, is like being fluid in your identity and the ability to know which aspect of yourself is necessary for a situation and which aspect of yourself you might want to leave for next time or leave for a different social group. But it's not saying that any part of yourself, because there's this big thing in society where people need to accept all of me, and it's like, no, they really don't. You should try to figure out places that allow you to be comfortable with yourself, but you also have to realize that you can't expect everybody to hold the burden of the thing that is you. And I think a lot of times in relationships, especially in friendships, we have these things where it's like, I want my friends to like all of me. And it's like, yeah, I should want you to grow and be better. And my perception of better may be different than your personal perception of better. And I think it's good to have friends around who have a good idea of what it would take for you to improve and being willing to listen to them, not to change what you do all the time, but to be able to accept the level of criticism that refines you. And that's the level of social interaction that I think it's interesting to me because how we make friends, how we make business partners, and the relationships that we have that allow us to grow in those spaces, I think are very important. And too often we find relationships that coddle our bad habits instead of encouraging us to change them.
Man, you said so much there. Can you still hear me?
Yes, again.
Okay. I just realized that the mic was switched to the other mic. Anyway, Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist. He has this rule. It's something like surround yourself with people who want the best for you. And, you know, it sounds obvious, right? Yet we still don't do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
we will find people who justify our bad habits to us, or we'll find someone who will hang out with someone who maybe we feel like we're just a little bit better than they are so we can make ourselves feel better, and these people actually don't want the best for you. Anyway, he also gave these examples of people who might not be your friend, people who essentially take glee in your pain, or when you come to them and you're sharing some negative experience that you had, and then rather than them empathizing with you and sharing in that moment with you, they then start to talk about their own negative experience. Like they're trying to one up you. And then the same thing on the positive end, right? You tell them, "Oh, I got this promotion." And they're like, "Oh yeah, I also got a promotion." It's like, "Well, can we can we, you know, we can get to you, but like I'm trying to, you know, those are two things that I feel like I've seen myself do, and now I try to watch. But also, it's something that I have met people who have done that, and it has been correlated to other behaviors that have ended those friendships in the past. So I found that to be useful.
Yeah, it's all about finding people that really almost value you in a certain way, you know? Because you want to have people around you that know you well enough to correct you, but aren't jealous or envious of you in a way to go out of the way to make a weird point. I think it's interesting how in different relationships we are able to identify the things that we don't like in people, but sometimes we have a hard time almost identifying those things in our friends. Sometimes we have certain friendships and relationships that um, I feel like they're meant to be lessons. They're meant to show you how people shouldn't react to what you bring to the table. And it takes a certain amount of time to remember those experiences and to really ground in those kind of relationships. Go ahead. I see you got a point.
No, that's crucial, man. I think honestly, I think that was one of the main questions or points that I wanted to discuss here today. It's like there's you and then there's the group, and sometimes you're right and sometimes the group's right. But how do you differentiate between the two? Like it's so difficult, right? Like I remember this one experience. I was in ROTC in college, and it's a whole bunch of college undergrads learning how to be, future officers. And we're in this lecture hall, and the professor asked the question, "Do you think it's professional for officers to curse in the military?" And everyone, including myself, essentially said no, because that's kind of like the persona. Like, again, a lot of us are naive. We're just like, we're supposed to be officers, we're supposed to be professional, we're supposed to set the example. And then there was this one guy who was like, "No, what are you talking about? It's the fucking military. Like, what do you mean?" and and he was right. And so that always stuck with me. He's like, man, that guy had the courage to like kind of be the weird kid, but he wasn't the weird kid. He was also he was the weird kid. In many other instances, he was a strange individual, but he was absolutely correct in many of those times where he stood against the group. And so it's difficult, man. And there's so much pressure to conform for good reason. Like we mentioned before, like you don't want to overwhelm people with your complexity. You first meet someone. I used to be, and I still kind of am cynical about small talk. I hate small talk.
Hmm.
I hate it. But I know that it's necessary because you aren't just doing small talk. You're communicating that you're a social animal that can read cues first. It's like you want to establish that baseline. And then if someone wants to take the conversation at a deeper level, then you can do that. But yeah, man, that question of when to conform to society and when not to conform to society, I think it's just a crucial one.
Definitely. I think that's one of the bigger talking points for me too. And the way I kind of frame it is how do you hold yourself accountable for your habits? And I think a lot of times in society, when we're getting into social spaces, we're like, you got to have good friends, first of all. Like, this is only something that works if you have people around you that spend the time to actually get to know you and pay enough attention to know when you're doing something that's not really beneficial to you. So you wouldn't have to be, you have to have intelligent friends, and then you have to have attentive friends because they need to know your patterns well enough to know, like, Brain being himself today. What's going on? What's really, you know what I'm saying, keeping you out of that space? And even like you said, the military example is great. It's like, don't allow the pressure of the guy that's whoever the lieutenant or higher ranking officer is to keep you from being honest about your perceptions of the military. You should be willing to be honest about that, regardless of where you are. And like you said, though, in these social spaces, some people lose track of their personal identity in a way that's not advantageous to the group at all. Like, if we all feel this way, it should be more than one person that's willing to say that. And like you said, a lot of times in social spaces, there is an aspect of groupthink. If one or two people answer a question a certain way and the room reacts well, most of the rest of the answers will follow that. Most people aren't going to be willing to break that grain or that rhythm, whether it because they just want to go ahead and get through to the next topic and they don't really care about the conversation, or because they don't have this fear of being exiled. And that's going to be a word that I use a lot when we talk about social cues, because it's like most of the fear here is, well, if I do something that's too weird, people won't want to talk to me no more, and I'll be lonely. That's the whole extent of social fear and structure. So it's like, oh, I don't want to dance on Instagram because if people don't think my dance is cool, then they're gonna make fun of me. And it's like, that's okay. Because if you do put the dance out and they love it, whether it's good or bad, people are going viral for looking crazy or doing a good job. But your lack of confidence in self and what you bring to the table will keep you from knowing how you could be received if you're not willing to be yourself. And I think that's the bigger lesson for me with this is, how do we create this social clarity that allows people to be themselves and not be completely oblivious to the group think in the room, to where it's like you're unnecessarily causing chaos in the space. Like, there is some necessary chaos, but then there's like, bro, you could have let that one go. And that's why I'm saying I'm chaotic neutral, because I like chaos, but there's certain stuff I just don't. I'm not finna hit. I'm not rocking the bear. The bear got it. I'm gonna go ahead and leave him with the honey and the bees, because either way, that situation is just stupid. Because if I mess with the bees, I'm getting stung. If I accidentally wake up the bear, I'm screwed either way, and I don't get either the honey or my life. So it's just certain situations where chaos isn't what you need.
Did you happen to pay attention to, let's say, either the social conformity of Black Lives Matter or the social conformity of COVID?
It was a lot. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I was big on the boat of, I don't take the flu shot, and this looked just like the flu shot, so I'm cool. No matter what y'all tell me, I was cool. And so I've never been a group think person. I'm very black sheep in nature. Like, something got to make sense to me for me to do it. If everybody else doing it and they don't make sense to me, I'm gonna sit and watch. If I ain't dying by the time it's something, like, I'm cool. I'm just gonna go ahead on. So like, I went through all of COVID with feeling the pressure, but then I just realized I'm not gonna talk about it. Why do I even have to talk about it? This is just something. Did I get the vaccine or not? Don't worry about it. Am I alive? Am I sick? Cool. Like, but I do see the pressure there, and I do know a lot of people got it just out of fear.
Yeah, I asked just to throw on the table some examples of what we're talking about. It's hard to know. It's hard to know what the right thing to do is, which again sounds obvious and self-evident, but that's what we're talking about. And as you were speaking, you kept mentioning having confidence in yourself to be able to navigate knowing when to conform and when not to conform. And then I thought, well, part of the way that you have confidence in yourself is to practice. Well, then, what are we practicing? I think it's something like tethering yourself to the truth. I think it's something like pragmatic experience, like getting out in the world and doing things, and that's how you build your confidence. And you're connecting to the truth as you, whatever it is. If you're trying to run a marathon and you join a run group and the run group says, oh, this is the great workout plan, we need to do these sprints and we need to do bleachers. But if you've ran marathons before, trained for it, then that gives you the confidence to say, well, maybe that works. Well, I know this works. Can we have a dialogue about that, right? So yeah, I think that makes sense.
And the bigger thing here for me when it comes to confidence is, a lot of my confidence comes from either I've done it the way that I'm telling you that I'm gonna do it, so I don't really have to concern, like you said, of whether or not this is gonna work or not. I know that I can go do it the way that I'm gonna do it, and I realize that my methods don't always work for everybody. So I'm not gonna be confident in telling nobody else to go do what I do, because it might not work for you. You might not move the way you need to for that to work. But for me, it works. And I also understand that there are things that I've done the wrong way enough to know that I'm not gonna do it that way again. And I think sometimes people have a fear of doing that as well. It's like, some people, like, for instance, oh, well, I went and did this and I made some money. Well, it made you some money, but when I went and did it, I lost some money. So I'm not gonna go do that again just because it made you some money Tuesday when I tried it Friday and it didn't work. And it's just a matter of being able to have enough experience to know what you're not gonna play with and what you are. Like, there's certain things I'm not gonna play with. There's certain things that you could come to me and I'd be like, yeah, sure, why not? I don't know. So I want to know. I'm curious. I mean, curiosity and confidence are my two favorite things. Either I'm curious to know what happens or I'm confident that I know what's happening. But if I'm confident to know what's happening, I'm willing to be wrong. And if I'm curious to know what happens, I'm willing to be confidently curious. And it's just like, I don't know what the result is, but I want to know. So I'm willing to go be confident about the pursuit of that thing in the fashion that I see it at. And I think, like we said, when we talk about social spaces, just understanding that it's like, you're going to have to be wrong to be right. A lot of people have this idea of social interactions as if, well, if I have this one wrong social interaction, I'll be blacklisted and ruined forever. I don't really think that works. I believe you end up positioned with people that you need to be around eventually if you don't give up on yourself. So it's really about having a level of self confidence to believe that you can get where you want to be and then being willing to take the actions that it takes to get there.
I also think that hierarchies and status help mediate your capacity to succeed or fail. And so, what I mean by that is, let's say I start a new job and I join this team. I present a new idea. They want to know if I'm good or not. And so they let me take the reins on it and it fails. It's not necessarily that they hold it against me forever. Maybe more than likely they don't. But what is more likely to happen is that my status kind of drops in that hierarchy in terms of my competence or their perception of my competence. In that instance, those two might go hand in hand, right? Like, I actually did fail, they perceived me fail, and then over time, I imagine it's kind of like an unconscious reputation score sheet or something like that, where the more you succeed, the higher your status becomes, and people become more willing to rely on you. And then we have the kind of tricky issue of the narcissist, right, who fakes their confidence and actually has zero competence. But sometimes people fall for it, especially if it's a large enough hierarchy where you can kind of be dodgy and say certain things at the right time and maneuver in a certain way. And so it's not a foolproof strategy, but I think it is interesting, the idea that hierarchies and social status is a way to forgive people for their failures, but also to promote them when they do succeed.
And I think it's important to realize that the pressure that comes from those situations is completely subconscious and illusionary. Like, there's an aspect of it that's like, oh, like, I don't want to say it's completely illusionary, but I'll put it this way. Like, I feel like a lot of times what's important for me in self work is making sure that you understand how to, what I call, stoke your own flame. And what that means is that if you say you're going to do something, you should start saying things that you could actually do. And after you create a habit of saying things that you can actually do and living up to them, you end up beginning to build up this self confidence. What a lot of people get in burnt, what I call burnt out, is you're making commitments that you can, which are yourself, that you can never keep up with, or to others. And so this creates this lack of self confidence because your experience begins to show you that you can't do what you say you're going to do. And so now you create an identity of, I'm not dependable. You know what I'm saying? But that line that you're creating was based off of you planning more than what you needed to. Like me, I'm a very big, I try to have everything planned out, and I always have a week where it's like, I don't know what I was doing. There's way too much going on. I've dropped like 4 balls that I thought I was going to be able to catch, and I just got to slow down. And it's about being accountable for that and figuring out, okay, so what do those adjustments look like? How could I break down some of the tasks that I had in that week in order to make it something that I can live up to? And this is more of a self confidence exercise. Like, people are like, oh, I don't feel confident. Well, you're trying to do two big things. Make smaller things for you to do so you can accomplish something every day, every week, every month. And then after 2 or 3 months of you accomplishing everything on your list, now you have that confidence back. Now that fire is back. Now you can attempt to plan something that's a 3 month goal because you believe that you can do it and you've created the micro habits to make it possible. So how does that relate to social structures? Because a lot of times we're like, oh, well, people around me don't respect me. Well, you haven't shown them why they should. You haven't been an example of the person that you're trying to be. And I think that's a big thing that we have to be accountable for is how often are we showing up as the person that we say we are? And how often do we drop that ball? And when we're asking that question, can we realize how it correlates to how we're not being received the way we want to in society?
Absolutely. And many hierarchies give you opportunities to showcase your habits. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like when you're at your job and you have to show up on time. It's like even on the days where let's say you don't have a meeting right away at 9 a.m. It's like but you're there at 8:45 and then people see that. It's like there are these unspoken rules. And sometimes there's spoken rules of course and it's good to be able to follow the spoken rules, but I would say one step further is being able to notice the implicit rules that people seem to attract themselves to or to rotate around and to make an effort to adhere to those as well. But again, we some rules are stupid. And so sometimes you have to call them out. But I would still say that it's better to master the rules before you break them. And so whenever you're entering a new hierarchy or social organization, a job, a book club, a fitness club, whatever it is, it's good to have an attitude of humility and to pay attention and to observe first. This is something that I always did in the Marine Corps whenever I was transitioning to a new unit and I'm taking the spot of an officer who's been there for 2 years, who's maybe done 2 deployments with this team, and so they're all already close. And then now I'm plopping myself in. It's like if I immediately start changing everything up, if I was the perfect officer, then maybe that would work, right? But it's like no, I have to learn the personalities. I have to learn what problems they had or didn't have, and I have to understand their goals. And so it's helpful when you're trying to fit in socially to just pay attention and have a humble attitude.
Definitely. And I think that'd be a nice place to kind of figure out what for the end for the rest of the talk. Like, well, not the rest of the talk, but the next topic is like, how do you best integrate yourself into new spaces? How do you pay attention to, first of all, like you said, I think the biggest thing is figuring out how to listen. Like, you need to observe what dynamics are already in play in a space, um, and then figure out how. And this is why self knowledge is so important because if you understand yourself, you can observe a space and see these different aspects of yourself in this space. Because if you have a whole view of yourself, everybody is a reflection of some aspect of self, whether they're leaning into more one emotion or another more than you or whatever is subjective. But you still can see kind of how things are moving if you're paying enough attention. And it's so weird because I mean I assume that this is something that most people can do that I because I do it easily, but I don't know how hard or difficult this is for some people to go into a space and like you said, listen first. Because if you listen first, you'll know, okay, well, who's in charge? Who's just giving out more information? And who are the people that I'm gonna kind of have to pay attention to figure out what their deal is, you know? Like there's a different scale in every room to some rooms you come in and everybody's gonna introduce themselves and you know everything you need off the bat. Sometimes you'll go in a room and everybody's just gonna like and so what do you do? Like how do you break the ice in a way that gives you something that you can work with? And those different type of social cues and nuances is something that's so hard to teach because telling you what to say doesn't always work if you don't have the energy or the body language to match it. And telling you to just listen sometimes, if you don't know what you're listening for, doesn't always help because you don't know how to respond once you have the information. So I've been trying to curious about, I guess maybe sociology would be the study of that, but like, how do people on a grand scale really move into new spaces? Because I've always been I'm gonna walk into the room, hey, how you doing? Who? Okay, cool. And then I'm gonna observe after that. Because I want a good idea of who's gonna be responsive to somebody that's friendly and who's not. And then once I know that, I know who in the room I'm gonna have to observe to get a feel on what's going on. And you don't always need all the information, but you need enough to accomplish whatever your intention is for the space. And so that also correlates to how you navigate. So what do you think about navigating? Well, you just gave up something about navigating new spaces, but how do you feel about the intention that you enter a space with and how it affects the different interactions you can have?
Um, I absolutely think that that's real. You know, you when it comes to perceiving anything, right? Your intention matters because what does it mean to set an intention or to have an intention? You're positing a purpose or a goal, right? I intend to get some females' phone numbers tonight, or I intend to make a good impression on my partner's boss, or whatever it is. I intend to not make a fool of myself, right? Once you set these goals, this is literally how perception works. The environment arranges itself in terms of, let's just say, tools and obstacles in relation to that goal, you know? And so it is absolutely very crucial. And when I say tools and obstacles, I just mean things, objects, people, entities that will help you pursue that goal, and then obstacles are things that will get in that way. And so, yeah, understanding your intention, going back to what you said about self work, knowing what you want, knowing your desires, your value hierarchy, and having them prioritized as well, that can definitely be helpful when you are trying to navigate social spaces.
Definitely. So as far as tools for that, I think it's interesting. Cause like before I got into like the architecture itself, where it's like, okay, so you study yourself with the seven sciences, and then you express yourself with seven sciences. And I think the expression part is very interesting because um I heard somebody say this about art and it stuck with me for a while. It's like when you create something, as soon as you put the last change to it, it's done and it's perfect. And it was great at that moment. And some people wait until they put their art into society for them to whether or not determine whether it's great. And it's like, no. If you have that intention of it being great once you finish it, then that intention can carry it quite far. And so I think when we get into social interactions and trying to figure out how we value ourselves, first of all, you have to be creative about your identity. And you need to create an identity that I feel like you should be proud of. Like you should be proud of who you see yourself as. Um, and I think with so much of a judgmental social space with social media and Instagram, people have a hard time being proud of who they say they are because it doesn't look cool on social media. You can't make it a post. You can't make a cool tweet about it. Well, you can, but you may not be in an environment or a social circle that will see it as that. And so I believe that when we talk about self-value, it's about first of all creating an identity that can't be destroyed by social interactions. And to me, that's about something that's not too ego driven. Like it needs to have some type of ego because it needs to be you and it needs to be unique, but it shouldn't be so ego driven that it can't exist in space with other people and their ideas as well, if that makes sense.
I feel like you brought up an interesting dichotomy there, one that we refer to every conversation, order and chaos. You mentioned the necessity of being creative, right? But then you also brought up the equally necessary element of stability, and being able to withstand, I'll say entropic forces, but here we could say social forces. And that's, again, I there's always this tension between speaking about deep ideas and heavily abstracted ideas and then trying to ground them into practically useful things. I wonder if I could try to do it, but I do think that that's crucial. Being creative, right? Being When I think creative, I think fluid, I think mobile, dynamic, being able to mold yourself to the constraints that you're presented with in a social, in an environment, but for our sakes in a social environment. And then the strengthening of your ego is another way to put it, right? Ensuring that your ego is able to withstand itself and to hold all of the different parts of you together such that you don't blend in a dissolving way to the crowd, right? You don't lose yourself to the crowd. How you do that, I have no idea, but it might have something to do with some of the things we spoke about before, play and imitation. When it comes to play, one crucial component of play that we do in this conversation is we take turns, and so you allow your personality time to express itself in the various social interactions that you're having, and then you take a pause, and then you listen and you pay attention and you observe and you take in, but then you also understand that your turn is coming at some point, and then when it comes to imitation, when we watch movies or cartoons or anime, whatever, a lot of what we do is we're imitating. We're imagining. What we do is we watch the characters act in the world, in their world. We infer their goals, and then we embody those goals essentially. And so, like I mentioned before, when you have your goal, you then perceive the world in terms of tools and obstacles in relation to that goal. Not only is it tools and obstacles, but it's also positive and negative emotion. When you encounter a tool, you feel good about that because you're potentially getting closer to your goal. Same thing with an obstacle, negative emotion. And so that's another reason why when you watch a lot of these great shows, and I'm thinking Jujutsu Kaisen again, you feel the emotions, you feel what they're feeling because you're sharing in that goal and then you're embodying it. Okay, how does that relate to your personality? The tension between essentially chaos and order in a social realm.
I got it.
Okay, go ahead.
So the way it relates for me is looking at it like a play, right? And so the biggest thing for me, and I love psychedelics for this because it gives you an opportunity to kind of visualize these things at a deeper level. And what it did for me is kind of gave me this piece of like really observing life like a show, like a play though, like a live action play. Like there's a stage and an audience, and you get an opportunity before you step on stage to grab a mask from a side around there. So imagine if every conversation is like, I'll bring this guy. You know what I'm saying? And knowing when you go into a room which stage is well and which one is not, and being well enough to know. I call it the energy in a space, but it's almost like a crowd. Like you can feel this like tension, like it's a buzzing almost that comes with different interactions. And this is going more into the metaphysical side, the people that get into the intuition and things of that nature. Like when people say, "Oh, I'm empathic," and "Oh, I'm feeling anxious because I'm in this space," and "Oh, this person in the room is anxious," or whatever. Like I don't feel like it's, for me personally, it's not so direct to where I'm like, oh, I can point out who in the room is this or that. But it's more so understanding that there's a noise in the room. When you say certain things, when you move certain ways, you feel this discomfort or this tension in the space. And being able to notice, okay, well, what about what I just did could cause that tension? Being aware enough to scan the room and be like, okay, did I make somebody uncomfortable? Am I saying something that somebody doesn't like? Am I bothering something that I don't realize it? And just being aware of those different nuances, that's the order. The order is being able to look at what's in and out of place in this space. Like you know what should and shouldn't be right in a room when something's wrong, when something's off. Most people have a decent gauge of that. And so the chaos is understanding how fluid and how fast you may have to change to keep it a stable space. Like you can tell those people that can't read a room. Like you can read in a room when someone's about to get into an argument. You can either choose to help diffuse the situation or escalate the situation. And that to me is a perfect example of how we see this, because it's been plenty of times where girls get into it and it's like, all right, hey dog, chill out. You know what I'm saying? And there's other situations where it's like you can see where it's being egged on or where it's being pushed past where somewhere where it's reasonably probably should have went. But if no one's there to balance it, if the right energy isn't in that space, if no one's willing to put on the right personality to make that happen, then things get more chaotic. And so this is the order in the chaos in it, is realizing that there are some people that bring a certain awareness to a space that can control an energy in a space. And there are certain people that are just victims to the energy that's already present in the space.
That reminds me a lot of leadership and what good leadership looks like. When I was
Definitely.
in when I was in high school, I had, let's just say over the course of my life though, I've met many great military leaders who were able to for lack of better terms, command the intuition of large amounts of people through chaos. And now, for much of that, these teams and organizations and units practice with each other a lot. And so there's a hierarchy in the social structure, right? And these different interrelations have been solidifying over months and years of training with each other and spending a lot of time with each other. And so it's almost like a chain reaction can occur where someone of a relatively high status can kind of do one thing and then it ripples throughout the rest of the group, and then people can move fast and break things, to use that cliche, which is great, which is really cool. But the leaders who could use humor, who knew, like you mentioned, they knew what persona to don depending on what was needed, whether it was, we needed the strict father, the tyrannical father to like really lay down the law, or we needed the trickster to really lighten the mood, or we needed the wise king to give us vision and direction and really guide us in the along the right path. Or oftentimes I would see this in more intimate settings, like the feminine side of it, with the compassion and the nurturing. It's like the great leaders knew what was needed, when it was needed, and how it needed to be communicated to the masses. And I'll be honest with you, that's an art, man. I have no idea how some of these people did
it's
it.
it's it's an amazing art form, and I think it even correlates back to what we talk about with the hero's journey of understanding which aspect of the journey you're in and which character you're playing is a very important thing there. It's like the way I look at it is like understanding that, okay, sometimes, like you said, sometimes you need the crone, sometimes you need the mother, sometimes you need the maiden, sometimes you need Chronos, sometimes you need Zeus, sometimes you need Jesus. You know what I'm saying? Like which archetype is necessary. And then when you look at the tree of life, you understand that, okay, so if there's the 10 Sephiroth and the 22 paths, each path has a card that goes with it, and each Sephiroth has um a name or a figment or a fragment or understanding of itself or an identity that goes with it. And so what you realize is that, well, for me, what I realized when I got to studying metaphysics and the tree of life and things like this, like I know I made it a bit complicated, is understanding that it's like every situation only has one or two paths to that next thing. So like if you're in a certain karma loop or whatever it is, or you're in a certain Sephiroth, or you're on a certain path to a certain place, there's only so many elements that can either get you higher or lower. In understanding those nuances and those interactions is something that I feel like metaphysics does a good job of unpacking, but it's very complicated to explain those nuances to different people if they're not already familiar with some of the subtle things. Like I can't even just quote a perfect example of like, oh yeah, well you go from this Sephiroth to this Sephiroth using this path, and that'll be like it's a little more situational than that. But it's just like understanding numerologies or understanding astrology. Like if you have certain people in the room that are certain zodiac signs, it's expected that they'll react based off of this. So like if you have a whole lot of fire in the room, you might want to have a water person's perspective. Or if you have a lot of earth in the room, you might need a wind, whatever those balances are. And there's so many different identifiers for that. And finding tools that you're, one, able to familiarize yourself with enough, and two, able to listen to well enough is how you can kind of learn how to do that. But most of the people that can do it is just genuinely a gift that they have. They're a certain kind of empathic where they know how people are feeling, they know what to say, and they know how to navigate a space. Some people say I'm pretty good at it. If I am, it's on accident, I promise you. I don't I don't do but I have learned that it is a confidence thing. It is going with that intuition of like this feels like the right thing to say. And doing that long enough to know when you're wrong and when you're right. Like you said, good leaders have been leaders for a while. And they've definitely probably led someone in the wrong direction before they led someone in the right direction.
Yeah, and uh, another aspect to this is we're all human beings. I know you'll appreciate this. We're all human beings, right? And so there's only so much difference that we have. Now, I'm going to twist it a little bit. There is a lot of diversity of personality, of background, all of that stuff, right? We are different people who have different perspectives and perceptions of the world, and we've had different experiences that color those perceptions. Okay, got it. We all also have encoded or embodied those personality differences on a universal framework, which is the human being, which is the human race. And so that's something that's helpful when trying to understand other people is, I guess, being aware that if you feel something, oftentimes the other person feels that too. You know, there's so much that we share, so much of our goals, our emotions, our experiences, and it's a tricky balance to get right. I think I've often formulated it as we are the same and different at the same time, and it's tricky to, you know, parse out. Go ahead.
I think what's interesting about that is I like to get into the concept of like understanding like the collective consciousness, and like there is a facet of this reality that whether or not we're completely aware of it or not connects all of this. And so when I get into like the understanding of collective consciousness, especially when we get into like being empathic, it's like if there is a collective consciousness and it has any type of proximity radar. So they say your auric field is 6 feet outside of your body. Anybody within 6 feet of you technically is within your auric field. They're within your radar, your body's radar for information. And so I think one thing that is important, or something they teach that's important for a lot of empaths, is realizing that um, some of the emotions that you feel could be in your environment more than they are in you, and then questioning what all carries emotion or vibration or frequency is a whole nother conversation. And some people get into, well, oh, it's the stars, or oh, it's the person in the room, or oh, it's this house, or it's this state. Everything has some type of vibration and how you correlate to it. And I think I'm so big on self-value because I believe that a person should be able to have confidence in their ability to control their own situation. But I also believe that there's an ignorance that comes with this idea that you're not affected by your environment. You are in some form or fashion. Whatever you want to blame it on that's causing the cue for it, your environment infects you, and your ability to dissociate from what's environmentally causing you distress and what's internally causing you distress, I believe is something that we can't always put an exact finger on. People try to, and I think that's my biggest reason why I'm not like so big on the spiritual aspect of it, because a lot of it, when you really get into it, like you can understand Kabbalism, most of your reality is mental. So like mentalism and that concept, most of what we believe is just made up in our head, and it's just meant to give us an idea of psychological security that allows us to go up that hierarchy of needs pyramid that we all saw as kids. And so I think that's one thing that I've always been able to ground into, is that there is a need for environmental comfort or personal comfort, whichever one you prioritize. But once you understand which one is easier for you to use to navigate, you have to acknowledge the other half of that for what it is and what it adds to the table, and being able to figure out how you rationalize that. You can either ignore it all and just go based off of what is and what isn't. I believe that's one thing that people talk about, being mindful and being present, is being able to, okay, I'm only going to deal with the information that's actually in this space. I'm not going to bring in like, oh, well, the last time I interacted with this person, this happened, because then you're getting into stereotypes that may not be true in your current situation. Or if people that have trauma is like, oh, well, the last time somebody rose their voice at me, they also put their hands on me. And it's like, everybody that yell at you ain't gonna punch you in the face, my guy. So being able to understand those nuances and how that works is, I think, important to how we grow.
You said a lot there. I think the last part I would just comment on, I guess, is this never ending contention with change, essentially. you brought up the dichotomy of, let's say, the environment and then your internal milieu is a term that I've heard used a lot, inside you, right?
Hmm.
And you could think of both of those domains as worlds in some sense. So maybe I'll just use, the external world and the internal world. Both of those things are also changing a lot. And somehow you are there in between. Maybe you are the spirit or the being or the force that tries to bring balance between them, right? And then ultimately you die when the balance between the two is too far away, right? I don't know. Maybe that's one way to think of it, when entropy just dissolves that boundary between the external and the internal, and then it's all one formless mess. Where is I going with this? Um, External world, internal world, you as the being that is trying to find balance between them. Oh, yeah. You have the external world, you have the internal world, and you are mediating between them as they are both changing into the future. And
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, go ahead.
I was just going to bring up essentially Jung's individuation process with his theory of enlightenment, for lack of better terms, or personality development, included both contention and adaptation to the external and internal worlds. And so he said that you are constantly going through what he called a circumambulation. And so you are going through this cycle that's, if done properly, oriented upwards, where you are progressing into the external world. And as long as things are going as you expect them and desire them to, then things are fine. But then you encounter a problem, and that kind of that halts what he would say is the dissipation of libido into the external world. And once that halts, then you go into a regression, or you go back into the internal world. And so this is, let's say, you dreaming or fantasizing or creatively expressing the archetypes and the complexes to gain more energy, psychic energy, libido, information to then propel yourself back into a progression to be better able to contend with the external world. And then again, that process is reciprocal. And so the same way where it's like you are going through different internal changes, sometimes grounding yourself in practical work in the environment is what helps you better organize your internal psyche. And so those were the ideas that popped up as you were talking.
Yeah. I think we're at an interesting point now in the conversation because we keep getting back to this. First of all, we always end up at a dualistic point. What's the balance between these two things: internal, external world, subject, objective reality, male, female, positive, negative. And even when I get to this, is like understanding like how you're saying is that like your soul kind of sits in the middle of your internal and reality and your external reality. And as you were describing it, I think about that push and pull back and forth is what they call like the churning between the cerebrum and the cherub, and like how the cherub represents the physical body, the multitude of personalities, the four-headed angel with two wings that is close to the physical. Some people see that as Cupid, or the idea of how love connects us in between our individual self. And then you have the external or the seraph, which is like the burning bush in this aspect. It's the reality externally communicating with the individual. I think it's just so interesting because I haven't really unpacked a lot of this yet, but I do believe that there's a correlation or there's a secret being spoken when we talk about this dance of this celestial space and how it correlates to our actuality as a being. Not to make this too complicated, what am I saying? I'm saying that I believe that the study of how angels work within the world is an explanation of how ideas and personalities are shaped within the physical and non-physical worlds that we live in. So for instance, like the idea of angels being messengers. Well, angels come in thoughts are messages from this source to you. You know what I'm saying? So your thoughts could be angels in a sense, or you're like there's so many facets of this that are kind of breaking down to really just asking the question of where do you really sit in this? Like we could say it's the physical or the external, but we most probably I would always argue that it's the soul seat that the actuality, like we said at the beginning, of what is the actuality of what you are? It's your soul self. It's the self that you would be if you weren't influenced by outside ideas. Like if your channel was completely clear. Some people argue that being vegan and only eating certain things can help with that. Some people argue that meditation and fasting is the only way to get a clear channel. Some people would say that working out and being in a certain kind of shape is what clears your channel up. And this is all talking about tuning the physical vessel. But then there's also an aspect of positioning. When we talk about a lot of faith, where it talks about you have to be in position for blessing, whether it's being meditating at a certain time, facing a certain direction, or whether it's being at the church so many times a week, or tithing in a certain way that externally is an action that you take for it. And so I believe that there's a mixture of the practices and things you do physically in the reality and your internal space that kind of correlates to you tuning into this soul self and making it the more clear or how you speak it within yourself. So what I'm saying is there's an aspect of what we see in spirituality that's explaining how to clean the body for the soul to speak more clearly.
I wonder if that's in any way associated with various ancient rituals and initiation processes where the ritual could be thought of as an ordering process that what when you mentioned different habits or disciplines or patterns of thinking that what did you say cleanse the body so that way the messages of the soul can get through,
Mm-hmm.
right? Again, I'm framing that in a chaos and order dichotomy, but I was also thinking about trying to tie this back to our overarching topic of how the self relates to society, and then maybe to wrap up the conversation. I wonder if that's what rituals are supposed to be. You know, we use the term ritual very loosely. You know, people, athletes have a pre-game, post-game ritual. We have our morning rituals, and then obviously, in a more religious or mythological sense, some ancient societies, using blood sacrifices as a form of ritual. It's like, what exactly is a ritual? And it seems to be a model. It seems to be, I don't know if
Small journey or story.
exactly. I don't know if I can put all of these ideas together because depending on how you use the terms, you know, societies used to, sometimes still do, have initiation rituals that were supposed to what, and it's somewhat separate from male and female, but typically for men, the goal was to what, prove your worth. You were supposed to. It often required a sacrifice. It required a dissolution of the ego, like you mentioned, essentially a hero's journey, right? And I couldn't help but think about that in relation to what you just said in terms of cleansing the soul. And I don't know if I can put it together right now, but it is interesting that societies, I mean, even today, like we mentioned before, if you're joining the military, you go through boot camp, like that's an initiation, right? That's a ritual, right? And then we have ceremonies. Like, come on, like we're still we still have this deeply embedded religious or mythological substrate. So it's not like we have forgotten these things necessarily as a society, although we partially have. But we understand the necessity of ritual, and I wonder, I guess, even from a societal level as well as a psychological level, how that relates to cleansing the body so that way the soul can speak.
I mean, even if you look at it like so, from my when I think of it, and like the point you're bringing out is exactly where I would want to go with it. If we were to get into it a bit deeper, you understand that the rituals and ceremonies that come in these different socials, like for instance, let's think about like just baptism as like a clear example. The whole point of baptism, most people will ask you, "Oh, if you're Christian, have you joined a church? Do you believe in God? Have you been baptized?" These are like the key things that you need to be a part of that society and social structure at a certain level. Like there are certain people that won't have certain conversations with you unless you've achieved or been through those certain initiations. And the idea here is that going through those processes and making those commitments puts you in a state of mind to only bring forth certain kind of thinking. You see what I'm saying? And so it's the same thing with anything else. Even when we think about the military, well, the military is just training you to be ready to deal with the pressures of the social structure that you're entering. You can say the same thing about different organizations and how their initiation rituals or processes are meant to teach you how to properly interact as a part of that society or social structure. And so I think an argument that I have a lot of times is that America fumbles because we don't have any rites of passage in America. So nobody knows what the fuck we're supposed to be doing to get along in our society. We really don't have a clear vision of what that looks like. We would argue that, oh, well, school is that. But school and graduation, I mean, you could say, what is the test, the ritual? Like, that's not really, you feel what I'm saying? Like, there's no real clear point at which in that where you're directed in a way, you know? And so I think that's something that I'll be interested in is what is society put in place to make you a better version of yourself? And what do those different rituals and processes look like? Even when we talk about religious practice, a religious practice is supposed to be refining you or giving you the habits that you need to act like a better person on a day to day. If you follow the 10 Commandments, you're most likely going to be a pretty decent person. If you follow the rules of Ma'at, you're even better person. You know what I'm saying? And then if you begin to integrate those things in how you plan and how you think, that's even better. But the problem that I then realize is that sometimes the initiation, the practice, and like I said, the actuality of how it's being enacted are always three separate things. And so we're not really ingesting the system in a way for us to get to the refining part because most people are still practicing instead of living in that space. And that's something I have a lot of conversation with. Like, I love religious practice, but at what point does this practice become how you live your life?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Excellent. Man, that'll be good for the next conversation. Essentially still staying in this realm of trying to understand being in relation to society, but honing in on, I guess, society's active engagement with being in terms of rituals and initiations and religious practices. Okay. I like it. Dog, this was
Definitely,
good.
definitely enjoyed the conversation, dog. I'm gonna get better at promoting me being on Twitch Live so more people can pop out, and we just gonna continue to keep building, dog. And we'll have to have one live one of these days. I'm gonna pop up on you on New York, or you can pop up in the city. We sit down and get a real nice setup and see if we can bring some more. Maybe we can bring some guests or something. I don't know. Just being creative. These are just ideas I'm pitching out there. But I'm definitely enjoying the conversation and the bills, brother. Anything else you got for me today?
Nah, man. We're good.
All right, boss man. Stay up and
All right, man.
go ahead, G.
Later.
Later.